The first act of Queen Victoria of England after her coronation was to move her bed out of her mother's bedroom. A Queen of England who never lived in that country or even visited it. This was Berengaria, who in 1191 married Richard I the Lionheart. During the reign of Catherine I of Russia, 1725 to 1727, the rules for parties proclaimed that no gentleman should get drunk before 9 o'clock, and no lady at any time. Princess Elizabeth, Catherine's daughter, and the other young ladies of the court amused themselves at cross-dressing balls, which allowed them to flout these rules. Princess George, sick of Greece and Denmark, born Princess Marie Bonaparte, an aunt of Queen Elizabeth II of England, paid the Nazis a bribe or ransom of approximately £20,000 sterling, which allowed Sigmund Freud, at age 82, to move from Austria to England in 1938. The occupation authorities had demanded the money, falsely declaring that the psychoanalyst owed income taxes and threatening the confiscation of Freud's library and archive. The father of psychoanalysis paid the princess back after arriving in England, having been able to get gold out of Austria, also with her help. Freud lived in England for 15 months before dying of cancer. Queen Elizabeth II of England used 3 crowns on her coronation day in 1953. On the way to Westminster Abbey, she wore Queen Victoria's diamond diadem. The official act of coronation was performed with the heavy St. Edward's crown, which is made of solid gold with pearl-studded arches. The crown for the procession from the abbey was the imperial state crown, which has silver arches and thick ermine borders. Elizabeth I of England was in favor of bowling, dice, playing cards, and fencing clubs. The mayor and councillors of London were opposed to these diversions. Bowling, dice, playing cards, and fencing clubs were permitted. Elizabeth also vetoed a law that had been passed in 1585 by both Houses of Parliament, which would have restricted Sunday pastimes such as shooting competitions and theatre attendance. She argued that what was good enough for the Queen was also good enough for her subjects. Furthermore, the government would profit from the money being spent on these amusements. Queen Austrachild, wife of the Frankish king Guntram, was ill with dysentery in the year 580 AD. She thought her 2 physicians were not putting enough effort into curing her. So she extracted a promise from King Guntram to kill them over her grave if she died. The Queen died, and the physicians were executed just as she wished, in the presence of the other court doctors. During her tour of the Russian provinces in 1787, Catherine II the Great believed, upon seeing cheerful people and prosperous villages, that she had succeeded in making her subjects happy. She did not realize that it was all a deception concocted by her one-eyed prime minister, Potemkin, who had Potemkin villages set up along the royal route. He had ordered the people to clean the streets, paint the facades of their houses, wear their best clothes, and smile. The Empress never noticed the misery and filth behind those facades. For the 40 years following the death of her prince consort, Queen Victoria ordered that his nightclothes be laid out again every day on his bed in his rooms at Windsor Castle. The first permanent settlement in the Old Northwest, founded in 1788 among the embankments of the Almecas, was named in honor of a hedonistic queen of France, who was later convicted of treason and guillotined. The city is Marietta in southeastern Ohio, and the queen was Marie Antoinette. Eleanor of Aquitaine, as Queen of England, presided over one of the most extraordinary institutions in history, the medieval courts of love. Problems of romantic passion, for example, is conjugal love possible? Were brought before her and a jury of great ladies, who issued solemn judicial decisions. The aforementioned question was answered in the negative. The ringleader of the bedchamber crisis in England in 1839 was Queen Victoria, who refused to let Robert Peel, the Prime Minister candidate, replace her ladies-in-waiting with others of his choosing. Peel had to concede, but in 1841 he became Prime Minister with the authority to remove those surrounding the Queen. The bedchamber crisis was the last successful attempt by a British sovereign to reject a Prime Minister. The first female pharaoh of Egypt was Hatshepsut, who began her reign in 1502 BC. To avoid upsetting conventions, she had herself depicted in male clothing, with a beard and without breasts. When Elizabeth I of Russia died in 1762, 15,000 dresses were found in her wardrobe. She was accustomed to changing her clothes 2 or even 3 times in one night. One of the many details that must be attended to for a British coronation is the proper anointing oil. Elizabeth I said of hers that it was disgusting grease and smelled bad. Charles I had a special formula, which included orange blossoms, roses, cinnamon, jasmine, sesame, musk, civet, and ambergris. The oil is traditionally produced in a sufficient quantity to last for several coronations. When Elizabeth II was to be crowned in 1953, the oil reserves had been destroyed by bombs, and the firm that had prepared it since Queen Victoria's time had disappeared. A Bond Street chemist offered to make a new mixture. To ensure his sense of smell was perfect, he gave up smoking for a month before starting work. Queen Victoria's mother tongue was not English. Her mother, the daughter of a German duke, spoke German at home, and Victoria, although she reigned over England for 64 years, was never able to speak English perfectly. In 1819, the year Queen Victoria was born, none of the 7 sons and 5 daughters of her reigning grandfather, King George III, had a single legitimate child who could inherit the throne. Victoria, daughter of Edward, George's 4th son, became queen after the death of her uncle, William IV, in 1837. A couple of royal banquets cost Queen Isabella the Catholic as much as it cost her to sponsor Columbus's first expedition to the New World. When Catherine the Great traveled from St. Petersburg to Moscow for her coronation ceremony, the court followed her in 14 large sleighs and about 200 smaller ones. One of the sleighs was a miniature palace on runners. It contained a salon, a library, and a bedroom. 8 people could stand in it side by side. When Mary, Queen of Scots, married her first husband, Francis, the Dauphin of France, she adorned herself in a white wedding dress because it was her favorite color. Today, no one would be surprised by this choice, but at that time, Mary Stuart was defying tradition. White was the traditional color of mourning for French queens. By wearing white, she foretold the death of her young husband 2 years later, and her own tragic end. When anesthesia was first used to alleviate labor pains in the late 1840s, many clergymen, all men, objected that Eve was told in the Bible, "In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children," as one of the punishments for eating the forbidden fruit. However, in 1853, Queen Victoria allowed herself to be chloroformed to give birth to her 7th child, and all criticism ceased. None of the clerics had the courage to criticize the Queen. Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland when she was only 6 days old. At her birth on December 8, 1542, her father, James V, was on his deathbed. The baby queen was formally crowned in the chapel of Stirling Castle when she was just 9 months old. Too small to wear the crown, hold the scepter, or repeat her solemn vows. Henry VI of England was crowned at the same tender age in 1422. The 5th wife of Henry VIII, Queen Catherine Howard, rehearsed the role of her own execution. When she was informed that she would be beheaded the next day, the Queen requested that the executioner's axe and block be brought to her cell, and so it was done. After a year of pleas and flattery, the teenage Queen of Sweden got her way. In 1645, she succeeded in getting the French philosopher, mathematician, and sage René Descartes, cogito ergo sum, to help her found an Academy of Arts and Letters and to instruct her privately in philosophy. Queen Christina, 19 years old, even sent a warship to fetch the flattered French genius. The project lasted less than 5 months. A combination of the harsh Scandinavian climate and the working hours, for example. The philosophy instruction took place in the cold library of Christina's palace from 5 to 6 a.m., led Descartes to influenza and a premature death.
Was a very interesting video. Yes, subscribe to the channel and don't let to be curious.